The alien queen heard the human warrior's name. Then she fell to her knees. The chains were tight enough to cut. I had been kneeling on the obsidian floor for 40 minutes before anyone spoke to me, and when they finally did, it was not a question. It was a command to state my designation. I looked up. The throne room of the Vetheran hegemony was the largest enclosed space I had ever been inside. The ceiling was so far above me that the upper architecture disappeared into shadow. Light came from columns of pale blue crystal running the length of both walls, and between those columns stood guards in armor that looked grown rather than built, each one easily 7 feet tall. The throne itself sat on a raised dais at the far end of the chamber, and on it sat Empress Sorvan. She was not what I expected. I had seen Vetheran soldiers in the field. They were broad, scaled across the shoulders and neck, with 4 upper limbs and 2 thick legs built for gravity heavier than Earth standard. They moved like tanks. But the Empress was lean, almost elegant, with deep violet coloring along her crest and silver gray across her jaw. Her eyes were amber, and they were fixed on me with an intensity that I felt in my chest. The translator beside the dais repeated the command in standard. "State your designation." "Sergeant Cale Voss," I said. "9th Vanguard, 3rd Human Expeditionary." The translator rendered this into Vetheran. The words came out in that low, layered tone their language used. 2 or 3 frequencies stacked on top of each other. I had heard it described as how a pipe organ would sound if it were also a warning. The Empress did not respond immediately. She leaned slightly forward on the throne. One of her counselors, standing to her left, brought up a data slate and read from it. Another counselor, older, with pale gray scaling across the top of his head, took the slate from the first one and read it again. Then the older one dropped it. It hit the obsidian floor with a sound that carried through the entire chamber. Nobody picked it up. The counselor was staring at me. Not at the chains. Not at my uniform. At my face. At nothing specific about my face. Just my face. The way you stare when you are trying to match something to a memory. I kept very still. I had learned early in my career that when a room breaks around you, and you do not understand why, you do not move. You become the only stable object in the space. You wait. The Empress descended the dais. Her royal guard reacted immediately, stepping forward with weapons raised, but not at me. At her. There was a sharp exchange of words, her voice slicing through their protest cleanly, and they stepped back. She continued walking. Down the last step, across the floor, past her counselors, past the dropped slate, until she was standing less than an arm's length from where I knelt. She was taller than I had realized. Up close, the violet along her crest caught the light differently, almost iridescent. I could see a thin scar running from the edge of her jaw down toward her collarbone. She studied me the way a geologist studies a rock formation, thorough and slow, like she was reading something written in a language she had not spoken in a long time. I noticed the small things the way you always do when your body thinks it might be about to die. The way her secondary hands were clasped at the small of her back, the faint asymmetry of her crest, the left side slightly longer, like an old break healed at a slight angle, the even rhythm of her breathing, which was slower than a human's and completely controlled. Then she lowered herself to one knee. The chamber erupted. Several guards shouted. 2 counselors moved forward before catching themselves. Someone, I could not tell who, made a sound that was either a prayer or a profanity. The translator had stopped translating and was simply staring. I stayed where I was. She spoke. Her voice, up close, had that same layered quality as the others, but quieter and more deliberate, like she was choosing every frequency she used. The translator scrambled back into position and began relaying. "The Ungiv Sorath," the translator said, voice unsteady. "She is saying the Ungiv Sorath. It means, in direct translation, the one who held the door. She is asking if you know that name." I told her I did not. She nodded slowly, as if this answer confirmed something she had suspected. She spoke again, longer this time, and the translator struggled to keep pace. She says, 18 months ago, the hegemony lost contact with 3 colony vessels attempting to evacuate through the Keth Mora corridor. These vessels carried over 18,000 Vetheran civilians, including members of the royal family. The Orathi siege fleet had cut off the corridor and was broadcasting a countdown. They intended to destroy the transports to demonstrate their reach. The hegemony had no ships close enough to intervene. We believed the transports were lost. I felt something shift in my memory. Keth Mora. We had called it the moon job. Nobody above the rank of captain had given us a clear picture of why we were there or what we were buying time for. Our orders were simple. Hold the line at the ridge for as long as possible. Delay the siege fleet's advance. Do not retreat. There had been 31 of us when we arrived. Sergeant Lena Holt had led our second fire team until she took a hit in the 4th hour. and kept leading it for 3 more after that, refusing extraction until the comms cut out entirely. Private Owen Marsh, 18 years old, had held a ridge position by himself for 40 minutes with a jammed primary weapon and a broken wrist. I had not known his name before that day. I had known him for 11 hours, and then I had not known anything except that he was gone and the line had to hold anyway. There was one of us when the last Orathi cruiser finally broke off pursuit. She says, the translator continued, that the Vetha Aaron sensor net recorded the entire engagement, every minute of it. They watched a human unit hold the corridor for 11 hours against a force 30 times their size. They watched human soldiers die one by one and not fall back. They watched one soldier, at the end, draw the fleet's targeting systems alone, creating enough confusion in the Orathi fire control that the final transport made its jump window. The Empress had not looked away from me once. She says they thought you were dead. They searched the debris field for 3 weeks. They found your unit's designation markers and the biological signatures of your squad. They did not find yours. They concluded you had been vaporized. They held a ceremony. They wrote your name into the Vetheran scripture of remembrance. Your name, Sergeant Voss, not your unit, not your species, your name. I looked at the Empress. She was still on one knee. Her amber eyes were bright in a way that I slowly understood was not anger. They built a philosophy around it, the translator said quietly. Around what happened at Keth Mora. Around what your unit did. They call it Sorvan. It means to stand in a doorway for someone you cannot see, at a cost you have chosen to pay, without being asked. I realized then that her name was not a title. It was not inherited. She had taken that word as her own name. She had named herself after Keth Mora, after my squad, after Jensen and Carver and Lowe and all the others who had never come home from that cold gray moon. I sat with that for a moment. The weight of it was strange, not heavy in the way grief is heavy, but heavy in the way a quiet room is heavy, full of something that has no shape yet. 18,000 people, a royal daughter, a philosophy, a name, all of it growing in the dark from a battle I had filed in the part of my memory marked things that went wrong. I thought about what I had actually been thinking during those 11 hours. I thought about how it had not felt like philosophy. It had felt like keeping my hands from shaking long enough to pull a trigger. It had felt like the coolant coil on my rifle threatening to fail in the 3rd hour, and wrapping it in strips cut from my sleeve and praying. It had felt like Corporal Danny Ferris humming 4 bars of a song he never finished, over and over on the comms, and how at some point I stopped hearing the song and started hearing the silence where it should have been. I told the Empress all of this. I told her exactly what I remembered, not in any particular order. I told her about the coolant coil and about Ferris and about how by hour 7 I had stopped feeling afraid and started feeling something else that I had never been able to name properly, something closer to clarity than courage. I told her we had not known the transports were there. I told her the mission brief had simply said delay and hold, and we had done that because it was what we were told to do, and because the alternative was leaving, and none of us had been able to make that feel like a real option. She listened without interrupting. The translator whispered beside her as I spoke. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked, through the translator, one more question. She asks, would it have changed anything if you had known we were behind you? I thought about it honestly. No, I said. Someone was behind us. That was enough. She stood up from her knee. She straightened to her full height and turned to her court, and she spoke in a voice that filled the chamber without effort, every frequency of it carrying command and something else, something close to grief and close to gratitude, wrapped together so tightly they were impossible to separate. The guards came forward, but not toward me. They came for my chains. A counselor produced a key and the locks came open and the metal fell away from my wrists. I stood up slowly. My knees had gone stiff on the stone floor. The Empress turned back to me. She extended her upper left hand, palm upward, and the translator said this was the Vetheran gesture of equal standing, offered to no one below the rank of High Commander in the presence of the court. I put my hand in hers. Her grip was firm and careful, like she was holding something she did not want to damage. 2 guards brought a chair. Not a prisoner's seat, not a bench against a wall. An actual chair, carved from the same dark material as the throne room floor, placed at a table that stretched 15 feet across polished stone. Counselors arranged themselves along one side. The older one, who had dropped the data slate earlier, retrieved it from the floor, quietly, and took his seat without making eye contact with anyone. There was a stillness in the room now that felt different from the stillness when I had first been dragged in. That first stillness had been the stillness of power being demonstrated. This one was something else. It was the stillness of a room that did not know what to do with a moment it had not prepared for. She gestured toward the table, and the translator told me she was inviting me to sit. Not as a prisoner, not as a representative of a species currently in a disputed border arrangement with the hegemony, as a witness. The only living human present at the event that the veteran had spent 18 months constructing their grief and their hope around. She wanted to understand humans, the translator said. She wanted to know how an entire species could produce soldiers willing to hold a door open for people they had never met and could not see. She wanted to understand what that was made of. I sat down at the table. Someone placed a cup of water in front of me, real water, cold and clear, offered without conditions. I thought about Ferris and his 4 bars of song. I thought about how he would have reacted to this room, to this moment, to an alien empress who named herself after the thing he died for without knowing it. I thought he would have laughed. I thought he would have been confused and a little embarrassed, the way he always got when someone thanked him, and then he would have made a joke that landed badly, and everyone would have laughed anyway. I picked up the cup. Across the table, Empress Sorvan watched me with those amber eyes, waiting. I thought about how I would explain it, what it was made of, how you raise a species that holds doors, how you get from biology and history and 10,000 years of surviving things that should have finished you, to the particular brand of stubbornness that looks like courage from the outside, and feels, from the inside, like simply not being able to leave. I thought about how the honest answer was probably uncomfortable. It was not that humans were brave in some exceptional species-wide way. It was that most of us had decided, at some point and usually without a lot of ceremony, that we would rather be the person who stayed than the person who left, that the cost of walking away from someone who needed the door held was higher than the cost of holding it. We had made that calculation so many times and in so many small ways across our lives, that by the time the moment came, the big terrible moment on a cold moon with 30 Arathi cruisers closing on a position that could not hold, the decision was already made. It had been made years ago, it just had not been tested yet. I did not have a clean answer. I was not sure there was one. But I had time, and she was willing to listen, and somewhere outside this chamber, 18,000 veteran civilians were alive because of 31 people who had never needed a reason beyond the one they already had. I set the cup down and I started talking. The door, as it turned out, was still open, and I was still holding it. That was enough. It had always been enough.